Hi, everybody. We're back again, and we're here today to talk about AI in project management. Hi, everybody. I'm here today with Paul Clapis. Paul is a physicist. He's actually earned a PhD in physics, and he's been working in the field of artificial intelligence for over 3 decades. He's worked at NASA. He has extensive experience as a public speaker, as an educator, as a trainer, and he also spends a lot of time coaching people within the project management community. We're really lucky to have Paul today with us. And before I finalize his bio, I just want to let you know he's working on a book. And that book should be due out by the end of 2022. So we're excited to announce that, and hopefully we'll have him back when that book becomes published and we can talk more about that. So Paul, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So I'm so excited about today's topic. I'm so interested in the subject of artificial intelligence, particularly as it relates to the day-to-day grind that most people face in terms of the rank and file project managers who are managing applications and making things real and making things happen. And so this is where the rubber hits the road. Okay. This is where we go from the abstract to what's really happening in the day-to-day. So I'm really happy to have you here today to talk about that. But before we get started, I would like you to kind of share a little bit about your history. Your background is very fascinating. You say you've had over 3 decades of experience in artificial intelligence. Could you tell us a little bit about that and how you got to where you are today?
Thanks. Yeah, I can. So I did start 30 years ago. It seems like a long time ago. And in those early days, I was working at Yale University at what was called Yale Science Park. A lot of companies were trying to spearhead the involvement in AI. At that time, there was so much excitement and enthusiasm and a lot of promise about what artificial intelligence could do. There was a lot of hype as well. And there were really companies and we're teaming up with universities because universities were spearheading most of that work. And they spent millions of dollars investing in algorithms, in computer architectures. There was a huge amount of enthusiasm and expectations about how successful AI would be. And those were heady times. It was hard to stay ahead of the hype. But as scientists, we were excited too about the potential. And that went on for about the first 10 years of the AI initiative.
And how would you characterize what's the difference between what was going on then and what's going on now? And we had a discussion recently, and you had said that there's been an explosion in AI progress over the past 5 years. What's really led to this? Why are we where we are now?
Yeah, well, there's probably 2 aspects to that. The first is there was all that excitement and hype 30 years ago. And unfortunately, it didn't pan out. The hype just exceeded the reality. We made very little progress. For at least 10, 15 years, there was almost no real progress. There was a lot of experimentation going on, but nothing was becoming commercially available. And we actually went through a period that we refer to as the AI winter, because there was just nothing going on. Nothing was growing. And ultimately, the main reason for that was that the field of AI requires very fast, very powerful computers. And the computers at the time, they were not fast enough to get anything done. The simplest experiments would take a week to run. And even if you built something, you couldn't deploy it because the companies that were deploying it didn't have the resources to spend millions of dollars on fast computers that could actually implement those algorithms. So in hindsight, that turned out to be the reason why very little progress was made. But in fact, the second part of that is that today, AI, in fact, is becoming enormously successful for exactly the obvious reason. Computers today are so much faster. You know, your iPhone has 10 times more power than the computers we were using to do AI research back 30 years ago, right? It's no surprise. And so in the last 5 to 10 years, the tremendous increase in computational power and a huge decrease in cost have made those algorithms very practical. So we've seen this huge resurgence of interest, but probably more importantly, we're seeing real progress being made in these algorithms, real world. It's not just conjecture. They're not just prototypes in some academic lab. It's real world productivity coming out of these algorithms because of the boost in computational power.
I don't want to go into a tangent into the abstract stratosphere. I want to try to keep this discussion grounded, but I am intrigued by something, and I have to ask this question. If computing power was a critical success factor for AI to really gain traction and start making progress, then that would suggest directly that as we continue to make progress with computing power in terms of new paradigms, people say Moore's law. Some people say it's slowing down. Other people say you're at the atomic level now in terms of 3 or 4 nanometers with some of these transistors, that you can't get any smaller than that. But on the other hand, you have a whole nother, all this research being done on other paradigms. There's quantum computing, there's biological computing, there's molecular computing that will take this to continue to take Moore's law going forward. So is it fair to say that if we see increases in power along the lines of, 1,000-fold or 10,000-fold, if we have new paradigms, that's going to also continue to drive this? Or are there any other constraints besides computing power that AI faces if it's going to continue progressing?
I think that's a great question. In fact, that's the kind of question we could spend an hour on. Let me condense that into a short answer. There's really 2 aspects of the field of AI. One is what we call general intelligence, which was the original thrust of AI, was to try to build computers that could solve problems the way humans did, that could think the way humans could. In fact, 30 years ago, one of the early startups was by a company called Danny Hillis, brilliant scientist. He started a computer company called Thinking Machines Corporation. And their charter was, we want to build a computer that will be proud of us. So that was the original idea of AI, was to mimic the human intelligence as general intelligence. And I think that we still don't have a good solution for that field of AI. Even with faster computers, we may eventually get there. The problem is that right now, there's just not much progress, and we don't even know what the next steps are. But the area that is working well is an area of very specific intelligence, where we build computer programs that mimic human intelligence at solving certain specific types of problems. That's where all the progress has been made. And yes, to your question, as computers get faster, that field of specific intelligence will get better and better and better and more sophisticated.
I'm glad, you're the second person I've interviewed that's made that point about general artificial intelligence not being ready for prime time, not even close. I think there's a lot of marketing hype around that. People throw that term around. I don't think they realize how far from a reality that is, and that the power of AI is in single domain, as you said. It's, specific, focused on specific problems, and in that extent, that's great, because we'll still have a job as humans, because we are the ultimate general intelligence prototype, humans.
Yeah, that's right.
So, but getting back to the real world here, so when AI started making real progress about 5 years ago, you told me that you started seeing this in the corporate world. Could you tell me a little bit about that in terms of how C-level executives were getting involved, and how they were the type that you actually started seeing real projects being undertaken? Could you kind of talk about that?
Yeah. I would say, there wasn't a paradigm switch. It was a gradual thing. But I would say over the last 5 years, here's the state that we're in today. Saw a number of good analytical surveys by Gartner Group and others say, let's look at 2020. There's a lot of good statistics on the year 2020. So in 2020, there was over 1,000 different startups in the field of AI. Venture capitalists were spending more than $5 billion a year on these startups. There was about $50 billion being spent by corporations on specific AI solutions, not research, but actually implementing solutions. And surveys of CEOs asked them, if, for those of you who are doing AI today, are you seeing improvements in any areas? And 80% of the CEOs said that they were seeing AI was having a positive contribution to their profitability and their efficiency. And there are a number of categories where that was happening. So these are real world numbers. This is not from a university. These are companies. Many of these are huge corporations that actually had AI projects in place, and they were actually enterprise level projects in production, and they were positively impacting the bottom line. So this is the difference between the AI winter and really where we are today.
So did you say $55 billion in corporate investment in AI solutions? Was that the number you used?
It was about 50 billion, but that's
billion.
just based on, so it's a huge amount of money.
Right? Yeah, that is a huge amount of money. Now, but you also shared with me in our discussion the other day that of all this money being spent, maybe half of it is materializing in successful pilot projects, and the other half these are failed projects. That that 50% of these projects are failing. Why is that? I mean, I know that we don't have a very good track record in software projects in general. Okay, right. and those statistics, we're all familiar with those statistics. And is there anything unusual about this or specific to this that you'd like to talk about why these projects are failing?
Yeah, I would say, unfortunately, you're right. We know, we're all familiar with software projects. We know that they have high failure rates, right? I would say, and this is really personally frustrating to me, AI projects have a higher failure rate than any other area of software development. I would say more than half of the AI projects that companies undertake never get past the prototype stage. And that's really discouraging, right? Because I really see myself as an AI evangelist. I've been in the field. I have that perspective. I see the potential, how it could help so many companies. And I see that progress being held back by a lot of issues. Mostly when I look at those failures and look at the categories of why these projects are failing or not getting past the prototype stage, I'm finding that the biggest gap is poor project management. Let me give you an example. I was working with a company. I do consulting with these large corporations. I was talking to the executive board. The CTO had brought me in. And I said, are you doing AI projects? Absolutely, we're doing AI projects. And I said, can you give me some examples of what you're doing? Are they in production yet? He says, no, they're still in the prototype stage. I said, okay, can you tell me what the goal of the project is? He says, well, we don't really have a goal. We just want to be able to say that we're doing AI in our company. And this, I think, is kind of the dirty little secret of a lot of these big corporations. They all want to say they're doing AI because it's got huge marketing buzz, right? But a lot of them have projects that have no goals. They have very poorly defined project plans. They have no requirements. They have no risk mitigation plans whatsoever. Now, does this sound familiar? These are the kinds of dilemmas that project managers face all the time. So it really turned out that I think these projects are just severely lacking formal project management. And that is really holding back a lot of these initiatives.
That's a great insight, because this is blocking and tackling. There is nothing super esoteric about what you just said. You're talking about basics, the basics of managing projects, which means that it's entirely within the capabilities of 800 there are 800 to 900,000 certified project management professionals around the world. Okay. That is totally within their powers to make a difference and to sort of help projects like this be successful. By the way, the PMI says that there's 50 million people worldwide that are doing project management. You just don't realize that they're doing project management, right? Just because they're not certified yet, and they haven't imposed that construct on their jobs. They don't see themselves as project managers, but they're actually doing it. So this is good news, because it means that one of the constraints that's holding back AI is it's not some complex mathematical problem. It's basic project management best practices that is within the capability of hundreds of thousands of people. That's great news. Can you give us some practical tips? I understand that you have some steps or some that recommendations or suggestions for people in the audience who are managers, who are project managers. Either you might be working on AI projects, or you might be working on them one day. You just haven't had the opportunity yet. Could you give us some advice to those folks about how they can make a difference and be more successful in these types of projects?
Yeah, certainly can. I think, again, you could spend a whole day on this topic. Given these failure modes, that a lot of these projects are failing because there's not enough formal project management on one hand. And on the other hand, you point out, but there's a lot of people out there who are project managers. So why is there this gap? If project managers are the solution, for the sake of argument, let's take my premise here that project managers are the solution that could greatly improve the success factors. Why isn't that happening today? And I think the biggest reason why that gap is existing is almost incredibly simple. I think project managers are intimidated. They think that to manage an AI project, they have to be rocket scientists, they have to be experts in mathematics, they have to know all this technology. And when I talk to project managers, and I talk to a lot of them, that's the problem. It's a lack of confidence. They just feel like they're not qualified to manage these AI projects. And I think that the simple solution is we have to get project managers past that. There's a lot of myths that project managers believe in. One is that you have to be an expert in technology. That is not true. They think you have to be good at math, right? I mean, in my classes, I'll ask project managers, how many of you loved your math classes? Nobody raises their hand. You don't have to be good at math. I think that's one of the biggest myths they have. They think you have to know Python or some other esoteric programming language. Absolutely not true. Anecdotally, I would say I recall the most successful AI project that I was ever involved in. The project manager knew nothing about math, about science. He was not a programmer. He was a history major. He did have PMP certification, and he was very, very good at project management. He was in his late 50s. He had been a project manager for about 30 years. So here's a guy who knew project management cold from a lot of experience, and he had tremendous confidence in his ability to manage projects. And he realized what I think is the secret here is that he already had all the skills he needed. Now, this was an AI project that had over 100 people on it, had 60 developers, had PhDs. I mean, it would intimidate a lot of people. He was not at all intimidated because he knew that project management success doesn't require you to be the technology expert, right? It was about managing the resources. It was managing the people, managing the plan. People would get up there and he would say, what's your progress? How are you doing? They're actually using an agile methodology, which is a very good fit for a lot of AI projects. He was agile certified. Okay, and so I think that helped build his confidence as well. So what I do is I tell project managers, here's really what you have to do. Step one, you have to overcome this fear, this confidence. There's actually, psychologists have a term, you may have heard of it, called the imposter syndrome. People who are often good at these things, they have this little bit of a fear. You see this with actors a lot. There are quotes from some incredible superstars. You can't believe that some of these people have this lack of confidence. But Mike Myers, he said he keeps waiting for the talent police to come haul him away. he thinks he's a total fraud, but he's a brilliant actor. Meryl Streep, incredible actress, right? She says she can't believe that anybody's paying her to be an actress, right? So you have to get over the imposter syndrome. You have to have confidence in yourself, and you do have to learn some things. And I have kind of put together like a five-step approach that I think any project manager could adopt.
Well, I want to know about those 5 steps. We're not leaving this. You're not getting out of here alive today until we get those 5 steps documented for our audience. But I'm glad to hear you say this because it's completely aligned with my philosophy, which has to do with the fact that we do not need to be experts. And in fact, I actually think it's dangerous, especially as we enter these times where we're in massive technological revolution, where we have multiple technologies, not just artificial intelligence, that are all revolutionary in their own right. And they are all kind of converging on each other and changing the projects that we're on, the nature of work, that there's a great temptation to feel that you have to become a specialist or an expert in these things in order to stay marketable. And that's not a good path. That's not a good path to go down, because by the time you become an expert in something, the technology has changed, the market has changed, and your level of knowledge is obsolete. Things are changing that quickly. Additionally, you might wind up learning something and it becomes automated, either through a combination of automation or artificial intelligence. And now your level of knowledge is something that is can be black boxed. It's a black box off the shelf, and we don't need humans to kind of understand that. And so it's important to not. I think people should be generalists, and they should know a little bit about a lot of things. And so I want to get into that, which is that what exactly do you need to know? Okay, without going too deep, what is that level? What is that balance that you're trying to strike? That's really valuable information.
Yeah, I can talk about that. And I can also, after that, maybe if we have time, I can give you also an idea of the kind of projects that I think are good.
Yes, sure, absolutely.
But the steps, if you like, I just quickly go through the 5 steps.
Sure, let's do it.
Okay. So I think the first one is there's a tremendous number of courses online, places like Udemy. And if you do web links, you can spell these things for people too. IBM has them. A number of other places have these. A lot of these courses are free. And what you want to do is you want to look for an overview course in AI. And that course only has to be like maybe, they usually tell you how long the course will take to complete. I would say 10, 20 hours max. Do not take a course that requires 4 weeks. That's going to be way too deep for you. You don't need that level. You want to take a few courses that are like between 8 and 20 hours each. And they can be free courses because the quality of these courses is incredible, even the free ones. But you want a course that allows you to get a certificate at the end. Because then what you want to do is you want to take that course, and then you want to take the certificate and you want to post that certificate on LinkedIn. You absolutely have to have a LinkedIn account, right? I think everybody who's a project manager does. And then you're going to send that certificate to your boss and your boss's boss. And you're going to say, I'm so excited. And you have to show enthusiasm and passion here, right? I'm so excited. I took this introductory course in AI and I really enjoyed it. I think I really learned a lot. And this helps you get over the imposter syndrome. Now, I used to be a vice president at a corporation. We are trained to look for success in our employees. And so if an employee sent me an email saying, look, I just completed this course, here's the certificate, bang, this little red flag pops in my mind that my next task is to promote that in the organization, send it to my boss, right? And pat you on the back and give you all sorts of kudos for having the initiative for taking a course like that. So what this does is it helps promote you as somebody who's interested in the field of AI. But again, you're not an expert. You're not trying to oversell yourself and say, I'm an expert. You're very honest to say it's a 20-hour course, but I'm very intrigued and I'd like to take more, right? You put that on LinkedIn. You find out if there's other people in your organization who are doing AI work, AI courses, or even doing a prototype project, and you offer to get involved. Now, if it's not in your department, that's okay. You say, I would just love to be able to attend if it's a Scrum meeting, say I'd like to attend your Agile review meetings, your retrospectives, just as an outsider. Very few Scrum projects would object to somebody doing that, right? So even if it's not in your department, you're going to do this a little bit on your own. And what it does is it gets you networking and connected with other people in your company who are doing some AI projects, right? And then you look around, and once you find out what these AI projects are, whether they're real or just getting started, you want to participate in those. And as you use what you've learned about the overview of AI, you're going to help brainstorm ways that you could use AI techniques within your company for projects. Because the courses will introduce you to the concepts, and you don't have to become a programmer. And then you, as a person working in your company, can then look around the organization and can find projects that would be suitable for that, and gives you a chance
That's
play
important. That's a really important point. Okay, because that's really where the rubber hits the road here, which is
right.
that you want to know enough so that you can imagine what the use cases are
Yes,
within
exactly.
your organization, so that you can see. I always tell people there's no such thing as a technology project. There's only business projects. Okay,
Right.
technology
Exactly.
just enables business value to be created. And you
Yes.
want to, if you're going to go through your organization, you want to understand where value is being created and how
Right.
technology enables it, and then understand how how value can be created in new ways as a result of AI, and
Yes.
then imagine what those use cases are. So that's what you're talking about. That's a very important step here, because that has to do with
Yes.
how much knowledge you need. You only really need to know enough to be able to brainstorm, to identify those use cases and brainstorm them into the people, and then have an intelligent conversation with about what are the pieces in the puzzle that you may need to kind of
Right.
work
Well,
on.
you said the key point there, which you made, is exactly right. The business value comes first. And so because you've worked in this company, you know the kinds of things that are going on. And because you've learned a little bit about what technology is out there in the field of AI, the idea is for you to match them together and say, okay, so I know a little bit about these AI areas now. I don't know necessarily how they work, but I also know I can see where there are projects in the company where there's opportunities to improve the business value. And then you connect them together. The latest edition of the PM Book of Knowledge actually talks about this. It's encouraging project managers not to be accountants. Don't allow your company to wait until the project's been defined, it's all been staffed, and then you just need some guy to manage the schedule. That's not what a project manager should be doing. The PMBOK wants you to become a leader in identifying projects within your corporation, getting involved early on in the first phases of the project, right? And so this is the opportunity for you to do that, to gain that visibility, and to get involved that way. So that's kind of in a nutshell. Obviously we could spend a lot more time on the specifics of what specific courses do you take, how do you let people know about this, et cetera. I mean, I do full day workshops on this kind of thing. But in a nutshell, that's the general approach leading to the kind of.
You said there were 5 steps. Did we just go through all 5 of them, or is
Yeah,
that?
we did that at a very high level, and
Got it.
to maybe elucidate them clearly. So the first one really is the learning, right? Taking the coursework to become familiar with that. The second step is really where you take the certificate from that and start publicize that internally to your management organization to let them know that you've done that. So you get credit for the fact that you took the initiative, right? The third step is really to start looking within your organization for others who are doing AI projects and find a way to network with them, either become an active part of their AI project or become an observer if it's like a project where it's in another department. So that's really the third one. And then the fourth one is really to team up with those projects, become actively involved. And then the fifth one is taking the leadership role, using your knowledge of AI techniques and matching them with needs within your organization, playing that leadership role of actually connecting the business need with the technology.
I think the really challenging part of this, it's very clear what you've laid out, but I think the most challenging part of this is going to be the brainstorming of the use cases. And so, because that's where I see challenge, and I see, could you give us some hypothetical scenarios in a traditional organization that you might have worked in yourself, or it could be an imaginary one that in a thought experiment, or it could be something that you've learned from your consulting, where there is a business and it creates value in a certain way, and how a project manager might be able to imagine new ways that value can be created, new use cases. Could you just give us some scenarios so that this becomes less abstract and something that's more real that we can understand?
Okay, so I would say the real use cases fall into 2 categories. The first category doesn't involve AI at all. The first use case where I think you add value is a broad category of digital transformation. Okay, you say, well, where's the AI? Well, digital transformation is really the precursor and the fundamental prerequisite for any successful enterprise AI project. And the reason I say that is that there's a saying that data is the fuel for AI, right? What do you use to fuel your car? You need gasoline. If that gasoline is dirty or inefficient or polluted, it's not going to be very effective, right? One of the obstacles to successful AI projects is you don't have good quality data within the organization. A lot of organizations, the data is in disparate formats. It's in paper, some of it's in Excel spreadsheets, some of it's in Word documents. If it does exist, it often exists in silos within the organization, right? So the precursor, I think, for any successful AI project is really data migration. And many times I would say the first use case, the most important use case is what I would say would be data transformation, data migration to the cloud, for example. You're taking data away from these silos and moving it into much more accessible parts of the system, which is often done by moving into the cloud, getting out of the silos, and then working on projects that cleanse that data. They get involved in unifying the data, identifying what data you have in the organization that has value, improving the quality of the data, getting rid of duplicate records, getting rid of missing data, getting rid of errors, validation. So those kinds of data migration projects are a great use case starting point. And then beyond that,
let's go. I mean, let's go beyond that. We can come back to that, but I want to know about the other category, which is let's assume that we're in an organization that is actively involved in that where they've seen value. They've already kind of bought into the fact that they need to migrate their data to the cloud. They need to clean it up. They understand that, and that's something that's ongoing. Right. Give me another scenario, please, where people would how they will identify these opportunities for AI.
Okay, so assuming you have good quality data, now I'd say the next set of categories of use cases would be, one of them would be what's called voice-assisted technologies like speech recognition, speech synthesis, using tools like Alexa or Siri. These tools have APIs that can be integrated into applications. So you have the opportunity now to make voice-assisted solutions, in many cases customer-facing solutions, where, say, customers can call in and interact with these systems. So voice-assisted technologies. A second category would be chatbots. And if people are not familiar with chatbots, you can look up that term. It's CHATBOT, right? These are automated systems that allow users to interact with systems where they can type in questions and get responses. And you sometimes see this for such simple things as checking on the status of orders, for example, or asking support questions. This is a category where the technology is very well developed. So you're not developing it from scratch. You're buying frameworks that are available, and your company is simply implementing them. So these are good categories because the risk factor is very low. The technology is relatively well developed. Another area is what's called RPA, robotic process automation. Again, a technology that's very well developed, and your teams can buy low-risk platforms that let you do robotic process automation that allow you to integrate some of the internal applications that you have within your company. If you want, we can go into more detail of that, but it's easy for people to Google, look up robotic process automation and read about that. And then I think the fourth category for use case would be decision support systems. And these are systems that will analyze data and make recommendations, either for internal use or for external use. A lot of companies start out using AI simply to help improve productivity internally. So these solutions are not necessarily, they don't necessarily have to be customer facing, and that can kind of reduce the risk because they're just used internally, right? And so all four of these can be used as internal solutions to improve productivity. Decision support systems, a big area that includes things like recommender systems. very useful internally, but could also be used for an externally facing, customer facing project as well.
So just to summarize, you said the low-hanging fruit for implementing an AI initiative would be voice-assisted technologies, chatbots, robotic process automation, and decision support systems. All of this predicated, of course, on the fact that you've got good, clean data centralized, that's been migrated.
Absolutely, that's the prerequisite.
That's it. Now, let's just take it up a notch. Okay, we've been take it up another level, higher to a slightly higher level. We've been talking about this from the perspective of your rank and file project manager. What if you're a C-level executive? Your view of this is going to be a little bit different. Okay, how do you, as a C-level executive, how do you identify? What is your thought process for identifying opportunities for implementing AI in your organization? How do you think about it as a C-level executive?
So I would say that for a C-level executive, and there are a number of criteria that they can use. The first is really to focus on what is the business value. That's number one, because too many of these, even people like CTOs, get kind of caught up in the excitement of AI, but they don't, and they think you don't need to demonstrate business value. They say, oh, we don't want to poison the well by trying to make this practical. I think it's exactly the opposite. If you don't identify a problem that has potentially good business value, it'll never become more than just a prototype, you know. So you have to look for real problems, and that's the value of a C-level executive.
By the way, that might, I hate to interrupt you, but that may be one of the reasons why these so many of these projects aren't getting past the prototype phase.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think that's part of it.
That they aren't focusing on business value,
right.
And then they're just dying on the vine.
Well, they have no demonstrated value. They just look like toys. But the other thing is that they often don't have specific goals. You know, they don't have real milestones. I think another thing that a C-level executive needs to do is look for a project that has potential scalability. So they look at something that's just too small to have, you know, even if it's successful, it's not sustainable because it doesn't have enough scalability to become something that has real significant value in the organization. And then it has to be something that has a schedule, that has a timetable, right? And again, technologists tend to be very bad at picking projects that have real time frames, right? I mean, I was a developer for a number of years, and we just love sandboxes. We just love to play and play and play. But we don't have the discipline that a C-level executive has, who's thinking about what is the timetable, you know, for this. I think that's really important. I think another thing a C-level exec needs to do is to demonstrate leadership and vision. That's the role of a C-level executive, right? We think of them as being leaders in the organization. And I think that's one of the keys is they have to show within the organization a real interest and a real commitment in leadership. You see that with some of the top executives, right? They look like real visionaries. They talk about that. I think that's one of the things that's lacking from a lot of these senior executives. They don't necessarily believe in the technology themselves, and they can't create that enthusiasm within the organization.
I think the key thing, though, is focus on business value. And I say that all the time. It's my mantra, focus on business value, focus on business value. And of course, that presupposes that you have to know enough. Again, we're not talking about being an expert here. Know enough about these technologies to understand how they could create different types of business value for your organization, a different level of knowledge. Okay. Nobody needs to understand the underlying mathematics behind, artificial intelligence, or to understand the intricacies of Python in order to envision the use cases that will create business value within your particular niche or within your particular business ecosystem that you're in. It's a totally different level of knowledge. As you have said, it's available. Stuff is available online, and we would encourage all of you to be continuous learners and curious and explore this stuff on your own time, so that you can stay relevant and marketable. I want to throw a curveball at you now. This is not a question that we discussed in our prior pre-session, but what do you think? What thoughts do you have about any strategies for getting around what they call the corporate immune system? And I think that that may be particularly relevant when it comes to AI projects, because businesses are stuck in the way that they do things, and people get vested interests in the way that things are being done. They build their careers on it. They have their eyes on retirement, and they don't want to rock the boat until they're gone. And that prevents organizations from adapting and to sort of changing. And so it can be futile, if not dangerous, for people to attack these types of adventurous initiatives in an environment like that. And is there any type of advice you have for how to get around that, how to be successful within an environment like that?
Yeah, I'd say is really the same answer that you would give for any digital transformation within the organization, because you have exactly the same problems there. Most organizations have all their data in these carefully controlled silos, right? And the biggest problem for doing data migration to a cloud, for example, is that people have ownership over this data. And if they centralize the data in the cloud, they're losing their privileged access to that, right? So, I mean, there are books written about this, about how to get around that. But the bottom line is really it's the same approaches that you would use to solve the problem of how do we do enterprise data migration or enterprise digital transformation, which often means that the answers are hidden in that topic, right? Finding experts in digital transformation and using the lessons that they've learned, because they are the exact same lessons, I think.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So as we, we've covered a lot of good ground, and I'm not going to let you leave before you answer a couple of questions about the future. So what do you, I know this is, nobody's going to hold you to this. You can make a prediction. Everybody's entitled to have their predictions. What do you think the world of AI is going to look like in 10 years?
I actually do have some clear ideas about that.
So we want to hear them.
Yeah, I think just because of the fact I've been in the field for so long, I see some very clear trends. One of them, I think, by far the biggest impact in the next 10 years is going to be in speech recognition and speech synthesis. When you look at something like Siri or Alexa today, that didn't even exist 5-10 years ago. In the early days, I was specifically working on areas of speech recognition, and they were massive failures. They required hundreds of hours of training, and they were very domain specific. They only worked by picking a specific topic that had a vocabulary of about 100 words, and that's all you could talk. Those 100 words are all they could recognize. While today's systems are not domain specific. You can talk about any topic. You can use a vocabulary of thousands of words and they understand you. Back then, the systems were also trainer specific. They could understand only the person who trained them. Now you look at Siri today, you don't have to sit there and train Siri. It understands everybody, even people with very poor accents, right? So that trend is going to increase even faster. So I predict in 10 years from now, nobody will even have a keyboard. Computers won't even have keyboards. A keyboard will be totally redundant, because the speech recognition will be so good that you'll just sit and talk to your computer. It'll be a totally natural thing. People won't know how to type anymore because you don't need to. So I think
I've never heard that. That's very interesting. I believe that, because the keyboard is something that we learned it's a skill that we could.
It's totally archaic.
We could easily unlearn.
10 years from now, keyboards will be obsolete.
Yeah. Any other predictions for the future, 10 years out?
Yeah, I think what we're going to see is AI is going to start losing the term. I think AI will become so successfully integrated into businesses that we won't call it AI anymore. The work in speech recognition came out of the AI community, but nobody really thinks of Siri as being AI anymore. Recommender systems, we used to think of them as AI. Now they're becoming totally incorporated. So I think a lot of the advances in decision support systems, particularly in the medical field, I think that's where you're going to start to see the biggest breakthroughs, is AI decision support systems. They don't replace the physician, but they assist the physician. I'll give you a quick example. I went in for a dermatology checkup a few days ago, And I was talking to my dermatologist about how he goes about, discovering whether something is a cancerous lesion on the skin or something like that. He said, I can't even explain how I do it. I've just learned how to do it over the years. But in fact, most dermatologists don't do a great job. And he says the computer technology today, the work in AI, recognizing cancerous lesions on the skin, is already twice as successful as what an experienced physician can do. So you're going to see, I think, in the next 10 years, the main breakthroughs in these AI systems will be in the medical field, assisting the decision support that the doctors make. I think that's going to be huge in the next 10 years.
We're going to have you come back because there's a lot that we just scratched the surface today. One last question. Any thoughts on the so-called singularity? Are you worried about that? I can't let you get away with somebody with a PhD in physics who's been in this field for 3 decades. I can't let you leave without answering that question. What do you think about the singularity?
Yeah, I think there were a number of years ago where somewhere in the 1800s, where some scientists declared that everything has been discovered. There's nothing new in physics to be discovered. Everything's been figured out. And of course, that was before the breakthroughs in quantum physics, for example, right? So that just completely opened up the field. And then we started looking at quantum physics and looking at things like quantum computing. And as a physicist, I can completely explain to you what it is, but no physicist can explain to you why it works the way it does. A physicist builds models based on empirical data and then uses those models to extrapolate and predict new things. And if those predictions turn out to be true and accurate, then that reinforces the model. But every good physicist understands that ultimately these are just models. And at some point, those models can become invalidated or superseded by new information. So all of us as scientists realize that we don't really profoundly understand things like singularities. We build models, we extrapolate from them as long as those models are useful. When the model no longer works, or we find that the domain of the model has shrunk, then we just look for new models. And that's the way it is. That'll continue that way indefinitely, I think.
Well, Paul, I'm going to have you come back because for every question you answered, I've got 3 more. So, but thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed it. I hope our audience learned. I think it was very practical, a very practical session, especially for those of you who are project managers in the audience. And we hope to bring you more practical sessions in the weeks ahead. So stay tuned. Paul, we'll see you at a later date. And don't forget, he's got a book coming out in the fall, and we'll let you know about that when that's ready. And until then, take care. Thank you again.